you think broadly about parenthood, which has been center of the cultural conversation here in this country in the last 2 weeks in the wake of Harrison Butker's comments during his commencement speech at Benedictine 2 weeks ago. And the fallout, or I guess the reaction to that, has continued. As most notably, it continued here in the last couple of days, courtesy of Travis and Jason Kelce and their podcast that dropped on Friday morning. I don't think it's a coincidence that their podcast, which normally comes out on Wednesday, came out on Friday, the week of a holiday weekend, knowing that they had to say something about Butker, but, if we drop it on Friday, long weekend, people forget about it by the next week. Smart. But, there's something in particular that Jason Kelce said about parenthood that got overlooked. Everybody's looking to hear Travis's reaction, and he, whatever. We played that early this morning. We'll play it again later in the show. But the most overlooked comment made during their entire conversation about Harrison Butker's comments came from Jason Kelce when he said this about parenthood and specifically fatherhood.
I don't think we have enough people talking about the foundations of families and the importance and the seriousness of parenthood.
Yeah.
If you are going to embark on being a parent, I do think it needs to be the most important thing in your life. If your kids are not the most important thing in you and your wife's life, you are failing, in my opinion. And I also don't think that women, for the most part of the issue here, I think there's a much bigger issue with another gender in terms of raising kids, but I don't want to go on that soapbox. We've played our entire careers with people that we don't align with everything. I don't know that I played with one teammate that he and I have agreed with every single thing that each one of us thinks.
It's so interesting because Jason Kelce's spot on about that. When he says, hey, if raising your children is not the most important thing in your life ahead of your career, then you're doing it wrong. And he's right. The gender that we have a much bigger problem with is men. And by the way, for these two guys who kind of beat around the bush, if I'm paraphrasing, they kind of were like, yeah, Travis or Harrison said a lot of things that we don't agree with. But then Jason Kelce says that. It's like, dude, I can tell you didn't watch the speech. Because Harrison Butker specifically called out men in his speech. I can tell these guys just read the headlines. And while they didn't knock Harrison Butker, they kind of rode the fence because they had to, appease their woke overlords. For Jason, it's ESPN. For Travis, it's Pfizer, Bud Light, and Taylor. But they didn't even watch the speech because they would have heard Harrison Butker say basically what Jason Kelce just said.
To the gentleman here today, part of what plagues our society is this lie that has been told to you that men are not necessary in the home or in our communities. As men, we set the tone of the culture, and when that is absent, disorder, dysfunction, and chaos set in. This absence of men in the home is what plays a large role in the violence we see all around the nation.
That's basically what Jason Kelce was getting to. Now, Jason Kelce didn't want to go down that road because that would have been way too controversial for a guy who just got a multi-million-dollar deal from ESPN, and that's his prerogative to not want to go down that road. But these guys kind of spent 5 minutes of the conversation saying, well, we don't agree with a lot of what Harrison said, but he's entitled to his opinion and his religion. And then Jason drops that bombshell about how men have been in large part much bigger failures in the household than women. And he's right. He's right. But why is that happening? That's happening because we are not allowing and valuing men to be men. We are creating a culture that allows men and in many ways does not shame men properly into being the men of their households. And this is what we get. We get women who are trying to, in too many cases, in rural and urban America, raise kids on their own and live a life of poverty. And it's killing an entire generation and it's destroying the culture. And that's what Harrison Butker in part was saying and getting at. And Jason Kelce is basically pointing out the same thing, but then being like, yeah, I don't agree with a lot of the speech. Okay, so you didn't actually watch it then. Because if you watched it, you would have realized that you guys are almost saying the same thing.